Luc Longley is a guy you couldn't miss. He's 7'2". If he stood in front of you, you wouldn't see the sun. He's an enormous character.
My size came from mum and dad. Dad's 6'10", mum's 6'4". I was always going to be big.
Everybody stares because he's that much bigger. Kids will open mouth, you know, and parents will pretend they haven't seen him, but they will, and you know, they'll get back in the car and go, "You would not believe what I saw. I saw a genuine giant today. He's huge, like his head was going up the top over the supermarket shelves."
Being tall has ergonomic challenges for sure. So I'm always redesigning cars and boats and houses to fit my size. Beds, have to get custom-made beds. Clothes when I was a teenager. Shit, I just was so embarrassed by the clothes that I could wear. Oh, there we go. There weren't very many choices.
Oh, look at that.
Actually gets me in the shoulders, just not quite in the arms.
Yeah.
It makes me furious now. I look at the teenagers and their jeans are all halfway up their calves, because that's cool. Well, mine were like that in the 80s and 90s, but it wasn't cool.
Long before I knew how he'd processed his fame and his great success and the riches he made, I admired how well he'd processed being what he termed a giant, a freak.
I remember once we went out to this pub and the bouncer starts yelling out at Luke, "Get off the bloody chair or I'll kick you out of here." And Luke, you know, very graciously, "I'm sorry, mate, I'm not on a chair." Anyway, the bouncer comes over and goes, "Jesus Christ."
I wouldn't trade it. I like being tall. It's certainly got me a long way in basketball. No, I wouldn't have been anywhere near the NBA if I hadn't been 7'2". I'm a realist about that.
Luke had a gift given to him by the maker upstairs. But he took the leap, and all of his success was through his own doing. Luke did all the hard work. Luc Longley was the pioneer for basketball in Australia in the sense that he was the first to go to the NBA. And he remains the only Australian to win multiple titles in the NBA. He was the starting centre for 3 years on the greatest team of all time.
The Chicago Bulls have won their 6th NBA championship, and it's their second three-peat.
There was nothing like the Chicago Bulls of '96 to '98. I don't know what you would compare it to. The Beatles in the mid-'60s, the Rolling Stones when Mick Jagger was at his height. That may never come along again for centuries. You may never, ever see anything like that. We won't.
I felt that Luc was a little bit of a fish out of water coming into the culture, the NBA culture.
Luc was a very gentle, nice person by nature. To be more of an intimidator, to knock somebody down, none of that was Luc's demeanor.
I was a gentle and empathetic young kid who had to figure out how to discard some of the gentleness and adopt some MJ, if you like.
I don't think Luc had the mentality of what it took to win. And, you know, you want to see that frustration. You want to see a little bit of anger. You want to dominate, you know, and there's times where I had to push him on that. You had to show him a little tough love. You know, that's what I call it, tough love.
He took a lot of heat from Michael, but he was also respected by Michael. So he fit right into the group and became a mainstay, you know, for that entire era.
I feel like basketball's given me an awful lot, and it's also cost me a fair bit in a lot of ways. I had to change an awful lot of who I was in order to really do the job. And coming out of that, I think I learned that not all of that suited me very well. And it's taken me quite a long time to acknowledge that, quite a long time to unpick it, and I'm still unlearning it. Sounds like the first question in a session with a psychologist, doesn't it? Tell me about your childhood. I grew up in Fremantle. At that stage was an interesting port town. It has a combination of a fishing village and then starting to be occupied by sort of alternative people. It's a different Freo to the one we grew up in.
Isn't it just?
It has been 30 years since they cleaned Freo up.
Yeah.
So I'm the eldest of 3 boys. We tend to run a bit as a pack. Do you want me to get like a wheelchair, a chair or some special device?
No, I'm all good, thank you, bro.
Okay.
We lived in what was essentially a warehouse building, and we were the first family in that part of town. We grew up around artists and academics and architects.
I remember going to the Star and Anchor at lunchtime in our school bags.
It was a different time.
You can count on grip.
There were no kids to play with, it was just us boys. And so, as boys will, we roamed everywhere. One minute we're at the end of a jetty spearfishing, the next minute we're climbing up a roof in a warehouse. It was very different. It was unusual.
I definitely grew up a gentle person. I wasn't a tough kid, didn't need to be. I was more of a creative kid. Grew up in a relatively creative environment. Dad and Mum were alternative, but I mean, Dad was an architect. They weren't full hippies, but they were definitely doing something different to any other kid I knew. I suppose I was a bit destined. I mean, I grew up on basketball courts. Mum and Dad were good basketballers.
They both played, and they played at really high levels, particularly Dad. He had a really quite an extraordinary career in his time.
When I was pregnant, I would be at Richard's basketball games, and I often wondered if the pounding of the ball and the running of the feet on the court kind of went into him in utero in some way.
He saw what I was doing, so it was almost a fait accompli.
Luke was identified pretty early as having considerable basketball talent, and he was picked for the under-14s team when he was about 12. But he was dropped because he'd been fooling around in practice.
I was that kid that was never that reliable because it wasn't big on the palette of things. I wanted to be an underwater architect. I was busy thinking about that.
First time I saw Luke play basketball was at the Australian Under-18 Championships in Queensland. He would have been about 16 years of age at that time, and he was very tall and awkward, but you could see enormous potential. And so I recruited him to come to Canberra the next year on a scholarship.
The Institute of Sport basketball program is dedicated to young people like these to give them the opportunities to play for Australia and further their basketball career.
I think one of the pivotal points when Luke was young was the separation of his parents. He was visibly affected, was confused, was angry, and I think he became overnight independent and grew up, had to, and felt like he was going to take the next steps by himself, and that's when, he went off to the institute.
I thought that he really was going there because he wanted a bit of distance and to sort of just not be quite so close to the chaos that was happening at home.
When you're in a family that's splitting, you don't know what the rules are anymore. Whereas in a game, everything is laid out for you so that you know exactly what's going on.
I never planned for basketball to be a big deal in my life. I didn't expect that it would be. I stumbled into it. However, it provided me with a family when mine was broken down. And I think that became my sort of loving focus almost. Like that's what I sort of poured myself into.
Anyone who's 7 foot tall and pretty well coordinated, you'd have to say, had a very big chance of being a very good basketball player. And that was my take on him. The question mark was whether he'd have the attitude and determination and will to excel at the game.
I wasn't serious. I wasn't down in the gym like all the other guys. People around at that stage would have said, oh, he's not going to make it, he doesn't want it badly enough.
I would say Luke is an accidental superstar. He was never driven to be a basketball person. We both went to the US for college, and I like to think I had a little bit of a hand in how he got there because New Mexico were recruiting me at the stage.
Luc was back in Perth and the scouts came to see Andy Vlahoff.
The coach comes out to visit me here, a guy called Gary Colson. I told him about my friend Luke, and I told Luke to meet me down at the basketball centre.
I don't know why he asked me to come along, maybe to expose me to them. Maybe he needed a foil for him to look good against, because I was still just bouncing around having a bit of fun.
And I walk in with Gary Colson, and Luke's just come off the beach. He's in his boardies, barefoot, 7 foot, 16-year-old. Gary Colson's jaw dropped. Pretty much forgot about me and went, I need this guy.
Gary Colson eventually offered him a scholarship, and the rest is history. Then Luc went to New Mexico for a college career.
It was sort of a stupid curiosity and a lust for adventure and a free ticket to America. And I saw the movie Animal House and toga parties looked like fun, and I just thought, great, I'm going to go and have a go at all that. The main thing in the Albuquerque sports-wise is the university basketball team, the University of New Mexico Lobos.
The biggest Lobo of them all was having the hardest time. Big 7-foot freshman Luc Longley admits he's a little bit out of condition.
Oh, I suppose I'm just lazy. No, I think it's a lot to do with fitness. We didn't have a very good team attitude that game. We didn't play very well.
There's some footage somewhere of a journalist asking me why I'd had a bad practice when I first got there. And I said, oh, I'm lazy, I suppose, ha, 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 like that was my big joke. So they crucified me a bit for that.
When Luc was recruited by New Mexico, he was very green. He didn't know the game very well, but he has really good hands for a guy his size. He can shoot the ball, he can pass the ball, and he can defend.
By the time I realised that I actually really loved playing basketball, I was on the Olympic team in '88. That's when I went, hang on, this is real. Like, I actually could be pretty good at this.
If the names Luc Longley and Andrew Vlahoff don't mean anything to you now, they soon will. They have just been selected in the Australian Boomers team to go to the Seoul Olympic Games.
The '88 Olympics were a turning point for Luc. He was in, I think, about the second year of college at New Mexico, and I picked him in that team. He was only 19 at the time, very controversial. A lot of people hadn't seen him, didn't know him. '88 was good because they played with the innocence of youth.
Yeah, it was joyous. We finished 4th, which was Australia's highest ever finish. But yeah, it was clear to everyone that probably Luc was on a different trajectory to anyone else.
When Luc went back to New Mexico after the Olympics, we all sat down and mapped out a way to go for him to go to the NBA.
I just felt this massive boost of confidence and energy, and I poured all that into my basketball. I cared about my teammates more than I cared about winning. And so therefore winning became how to reward them. So that's part of, I think, what drove me to be good.
It was certainly an intense time. The Lobos, the New Mexico Lobos, their college team are the biggest show in town. Luc was their biggest star, and he was this 7'2" Australian with flowing red hair and a different perspective on basketball and on the world, and I think they could feel that. So he was a big star and a very big fish in a very small pond.
I'm in the papers all the time, and every time I did something, they'd go mad. My confidence just went through the roof, and I can talk to girls all of a sudden. I remember spotting Kelly, who ended up being my wife, and thinking she was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, and plucking up the courage to talk to her.
Kelly had a hairdressing business, and she grew up in Albuquerque. They were right into each other straight away.
He got my phone number from my friend and called my house for 3 weeks, and he came over for dinner. And that night we went to the pit where the Lobos played, and we went to my salon where I cut off his mullet, the famous red mullet. was like, this is not right. But his accent, his height, I just fell.
She was very tough, so she was tougher than me, like she had a real street smart to her about her that was attractive to me because I didn't have that. And she was independent and she was confident, and why wouldn't you fall in love with that?
After Luke made the decision in his third year at college to go to the NBA, I think it really all happened. He got stronger, more serious about the game.
In basketball, there is one league which towers over every other league, and that's the NBA. And at that point, the NBA was becoming a global phenomenon.
I started getting told that there was NBA scouts in the stands, that they were looking at me. I mean, and I had been playing great and beating guys who end up in the NBA, and so I knew by then I believed in myself.
One NBA scout claims that the 7-footer with the flowing red hair has the potential to be Australia's best chance of becoming a millionaire in the lucrative National Basketball Association in the United States.
It's almost like an algorithm, you know. You put in the right variables, 7 foot, smart, strong, good guy, high IQ, you're going to get drafted.
And the 1991 NBA draft has moved to the big arena here at Madison Square Garden.
The Americans always make a big party around the draft because it's the introduction of new blood into their sport. And the way the NBA historically creates their level playing field is to offer the best possible athlete coming through the college system to the worst possible teams.
All the players go to New York, and there's a big thing in Madison Square Garden and media and attention.
With the 7th pick in the 1991 NBA draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Luc Longley from the University of New Mexico.
Being picked 7th basically, in a sense, says he was the 7th best player in American collegiate basketball that year. So that's an impressive acknowledgement.
Nobody from Australia has ever really made it big or made it in the NBA.
That opened up the eyes of the Australians because we tended to regard the NBA as something they played on another planet. It was out beyond our reach.
When I got to Minnesota, we were bad. We won 17 games out of, I think, 82 the first year I was there. And that was the most miserable year of my life. Hated it.
I moved up there and it was the frozen tundra. It was so cold. I'd never seen that kind of cold. And left my family, my friends, my business.
Teammates, I got on with a few of them, but there wasn't a lot of love in the locker room. It was competitive, which is good. Competitive is fine, but I didn't feel it at all. I wasn't enjoying it. People don't share the ball. People don't defend as well for each other. And all that sort of stuff was what really appealed to me more than whether or not we won or lost, funnily enough.
What's up, man? You don't move again? What's up, man? You getting all this camera time. Come on, share with my brothers, man. This is Crocodile Longley.
They weren't sure about his Australian laid-back attitude, and I think it took a bit of his confidence.
Luc Longley, you like Luc? No! What do you think of Luc Longley?
Well, let's see. Clumsy comes to mind right offhand.
He shows his emotion. And I could see him. He was running down the court and it was heavy. I knew that he was just really hating it.
My game from college didn't translate in the NBA. I hated it, but they had given me $1 million signing bonus. I was the first Australian to make it. I had to succeed. I went back at it and sort of redesigned myself a little bit, and I said, no, that wasn't good enough. Let's have another run at this. Which tools shall I pick up and beat myself up with? And so I re-engaged in the weight room and even watched videotape of how the good guys were doing it. Picked up a few more tools, you know, developed a little hook shot that I didn't have. I started to play with more confidence. And the general manager of the team, Trader Jack they called him, because he's always trading players, So he was rubbing his hands together saying, great, we can finally get something for this Australian kid who hasn't been very good because he's finding some juice and we can trade for him.
We watched him through his rookie season. I liked his game, I liked his size, I liked the fact that he was a really good passer, that he was a teammate. Yeah, it was his bulk more than anything else, his size. He's a big guy.
In the NBA, you can get traded any time before the middle of the season. You get traded, you get a call from your agent, you've got to be in the next town the next day, you call your wife, pack up the house and you fly to wherever it is. It happens quick.
We got the phone call. We've got good news and bad news. But the bad news is you're being traded. The good news is you're being traded to Chicago, to the Bulls. I think I was about 4 or 5 months pregnant with Claire, and Luke was on a flight and gone.
Got on a plane the next morning, flew to Chicago, super excited, and got to practice and straight away felt like I was home. They shared the ball and they were genuinely excited when you did well.
They needed him for what he could bring, and he was able to provide what they needed. He would absorb the blows physically from the other team, and I think that's what the Bulls needed most.
Strong rebound, spins, nice drop step by Luc.
People ask me, well, how did you end up winning 3 championships? Well, I got traded to Chicago. It was the first part, and lots of lucky stuff after that.
About my career. At 219 centimetres or 7 feet 2, Luc Longley was hardly intimidated by some members of the press gallery.
My wife is a lot happy to be around me since I've been with Chicago, mostly because winning basketball games is a lot more fun than losing. When I got to Chicago, they had just won 3 world championships in a row, and Michael Jordan, who we'll call MJ from now on, his dad died and he had an existential moment and decided to play baseball. So when I got there, it was a Michael Jordan-less team. Obviously, he's never going to be as good without the best player in the world, but we're still pretty competitive. Still with Phil Jackson coaching, still with Scottie Pippen at the helm.
Me and Luc really bonded. He's a bit of a joker to some degree, like myself, so me and him was able to hit it right off. The only unusual thing that struck me about him was his accent. That became something for me to get used to a bit.
You know, he comes to Chicago and plays for one of the great coaches ever, and Phil Jackson, and now it starts to make sense. Phil loved Luc, and Luc adored Phil. I mean, there was an instant connection.
I think Luc looked up to him as a father figure.
I always felt like it's hard for a big man to be a part of basketball because somewhere in the back of your mind you feel like, oh, just because I'm big, I'm a basketball player, rather than proficient or skilled. But Luc had a lot more than he's willing to admit. He was very adept at what he needed to do to be part of the team. He was a pass-first guy, which was important.
Here's the give and go, Longley to Harper. It's beautiful.
Phil was talking my language and talking calmly and slowly, not yelling at me like all the other coaches had. He managed to make me believe that I was great. So he put grease on the tracks, if you like.
You can't tell Luc to do something. You can't say, Luc, do this, because he's going to be resistant against commands. You have to tell him, Luc, tell yourself you can do this. And, you know, that became one of the methods that I used to talk to Luc about maybe scoring, being more aggressive.
We started to get rumours that MJ was thinking about coming back. He started hanging around at practice a little bit. First, it was just watching from the gallery upstairs. You could see him hanging out up there. I had never spoken to him. And suddenly he's at practice fighting with Scottie and barking orders, and he wasn't even part of the team. He just came in and took over practice.
When Jordan decides to come back, you know, with his celebrity and his name and his fame and everything, it became the biggest story in the United States. Might have been one of the biggest stories in the world.
Today, Michael Jordan, at age 32, tries to accomplish what no one else truly has in team sports history.
I was anxious to understand who my teammates were. My mindset was to go, try to get back and win. So you have to be prepared. You got to be ready to play.
When Michael comes back, it's amped up tenfold. Just the intensity and the awareness of what's coming. So I think it took some time for Luke to adapt and adjust.
Michael in the air, dumped underneath. Longley goes up, missed it.
Luke and other players, they felt like that they were walking on eggshells.
He just had all these sharp edges, like some sort of a ninja star.
You would assume that everybody had the same mentality as I had. Strive for perfection each and every time you step on the basketball court. But unfortunately, everybody don't have that same mentality. But I had a mission, I wanted them to understand what it took to win, and winning has a price. And I'm pretty sure there were times they were not happy with me. But, as a leader, sometimes you're not going to be well liked. You're not going to be, but you have to pull them along.
Michael was a demanding teammate. He wanted you to be as aggressive as he was. Second was not good enough. It just wasn't for him.
And the next thing that happened was, we'd lose a couple of games and they start looking around for people to blame. So they get blamed for a loss here, blamed for a loss there. Is Luke good enough? Can he do it? All that sort of stuff, which I was curious about as well. Am I good enough for this team? Like, how am I going to make this work? So search around for more tools, hammer myself into a different shape.
Michael rode him a lot, pushed him and cajoled him and criticised him, and with not a lot of encouragement, just like toughen up and you got a job to do your job, and this is what I need you to do if we're going to win.
He may not like this story. In '98, we were playing the Utah Jazz. The first quarter ends. Luke has 12 points, 4 blocks, and 4 rebounds. And I go to Luke, I say, that's how you f***ing play, man. You do that, we dominate. We up by 16 at the end of the game. Luke had 12 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 blocks. We're winning by 16, we lose by 15. And I just looked at Luke and I said, you know what, Luke? That is the last time I'm gonna give you a compliment in the middle of the game.
There was times where Mike would get pissed off at Luke, and Luke feels deeply, and that disappointment, of letting down a teammate, it affected him.
I knew he was capable. We all felt he was capable, but you have to be capable every single night for us to maintain the success. So I pushed him. Obviously I did, and verbally, I would challenge him in certain situations where I felt like, look, you're not doing what we expect you to do. It was a mindset that I felt like Luke had to learn, and I think he did learn.
He'll say, oh, Luke wasn't this and Luke wasn't that, so I made him this and I made him that. And I'll say, well, may or may not be true. I might not have been a killer like MJ was, but you don't need 12 killers. You need a group of humans that appreciate, understand, push and pull, work together.
Michael's point is, we won, so it worked. We did it my way and it worked. If we did it your way, it might not have worked.
The Bulls needed Michael Jordan to be successful, no doubt in my mind.
MJ. Oh, he did it! Oh, Michael shakes the finger.
I was still that kid from Freo who was reshaping himself. And MJ was 3-time world champion, best player on the planet, had his own shoes. And there was me and there was him, and somewhere between us was the rest of the team, and we had to figure out how to be together. And that wasn't his priority, but it was mine. I'm deeply thankful to MJ for showing me how to be a better basketballer, for compensating for my weaknesses with his brilliance. You don't have to love a bloke to be on his team, to care about him, to play basketball together. I didn't love MJ. I thought MJ was difficult and unnecessarily harsh on his teammates and probably on himself. And I think, I just didn't enjoy being around him that much. And that was cool. It was cool with MJ and it was cool with me. There was at the end of the day, we found a way to respect each other on the court and to coexist, and that was cool. beaten up. We were starting to get a bit scratchy at each other because we'd been living in this intense hub together for however long.
Even though we knew the breakup was coming, when it did hit, it was really sort of bizarre. Many of us struggled to find a new role with our teams. I know that was the case for Luc.
The end of my career really felt like a fizz after those high years in Chicago, and I just felt embarrassed. I didn't feel good about the end of my career at all.
He was searching, I think. And I think he would probably say himself that he was a bit lost at the time.
There you go, Claire. Oh, I'm gone.
I saw you.
I missed it.
The phone was ringing all day, all night. Everyone wanted to know, why aren't you in the, how are you feeling right now? Like drama, drama, drama.
Sitting there on the couch and watching episode after episode where I wasn't in it I was like, yeah, I was bummed about that.
I can understand why Australia would say, well, why wouldn't we include Luc? And we probably should have.